Welcome, folks, and good evening to our MJA podcast. This is episode 9, part 2, the series Cases State by State. This podcast will take you to Serial Killer Avenue. The serial killers we will be talking about on this podcast haven't been caught yet. MJA will cover 6 serial killers in 5 different states: California, Massachusetts, New Mexico, New York, and Michigan. The FBI's Elite Serial Crime Unit claims there are 25 to 50 active serial killers in the United States at any given moment. At one time, it was projected that Indiana alone had 15 serial killers operating in Indiana. In the last 14 years, they have caught 5 of those serial killers. Summer is the season for a serial killer. While it's been some time since we've had an active serial killer stalking the Hollywood Hills or other parts of the region, there are still Southern California murderers on the loose. The Zodiac Killer, or Zodiac, was a serial killer who operated in Northern California for at least the late 1960s to the early 1970s. The killer identified remains unknown. The killer's identity remains unknown. The killer originated the name Zodiac in a series of taunting letters sent to the local Bay Area press. These letters include 4 cryptograms or ciphers. Of the 4 ciphers sent, only one of them has definitely been solved. Suspects have been named by law: Arthur Lee Allen, Jack Terrence, Richard Galkorski, George Hill Odell Jr., George Russell Tucker, Earl Van Best Jr., Louis Joseph Myers. During the years, these suspects have been cleared. The Zodiac has never been caught. The murderer is most known for his crimes in Northern California, but he's also been linked to Southern California killings, including a pair of 1963 shooting deaths in Santa Barbara and the 1966 stabbing death of a college student, Joe Bates, in Riverside. At least 5 Northern California murders have been officially linked to the Zodiac case. In recent years, some private investigators have come out and said they think the Zodiac killer had some type of connection to the Charles Manson family. The original Night Stalker was named the Golden State Killer by the late Michelle McNamara to help with the confusion of all the East Area rapes names. June 18th is the 40th anniversary of the first attack, and the FBI had a press release today. The Golden State Killer. This guy was perhaps best known as the original Night Stalker, but authorities are trying to shift that nickname so the case is not confused with that of the Night Stalker Richard Ramirez in the 1980s, a Southern California psycho who died in 2013. The Golden State Killer committed 12 murders and about 45 rapes and dozens of home break-ins from 1976 to 1986, authorities say. Though this is another case of a killer more known for his Northern California deeds, investigators have linked him to the 1986 rape of a 18-year-old Irvine, as well as being raped, murdered, and attempted murder cases through 1979 through 1981 in 5 other California towns. The FBI is actively searching for this creep and might even give you $50,000 if you help agents find him. The crimes initially centered on the unincorporated areas of Carmichael, Citrus Heights, Rancho Cordova, all east of Sacramento, where at least 50 women was raped between June 18, 1976 to July 5, 1979. Through DNA evidence that kept building up that connected the Golden State Killer to 11 more California counties where crimes was committed by the Golden State Killer. DNA evidence conclusively links him to 8 murders. Some investigators also suspect the same perpetrator in 3 other murders. There have been suspects: Brent Glaspie, Paul Cornfed Schneider, Joe Alsip, who was a business partner of the victim, Layman Smith. Psychological profile. All criminalness matched serum and other bodily fluid evidence found at Southern California murder scenes. A psychological profile of the original Night Stalker was compiled. According to Leslie D. Ambrosia of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, she is a special agent with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the FDLE. She is responsible for criminal investigations at the Miami Regional Operations Center. Lee D. Ambrosia was the primary author of the profile. It is likely that of the original Night Stalker, who possesses the following characteristics: white male, dressed well and would not stand out in an upscale neighborhoods, drove a well-maintained car, emotional age 26 to 30 at the time the crimes were committed, engaged in a deviant behavior and brutal sex in his personal life, engaged in sex with prostitutes. His criminal record as a teenager that was expunged, had some knowledge of police investigative methods and evidence gathering techniques, had some means of income, but did not work in the early morning hours, hatred of women for real or perceived wrongs. If married, probably has a submissive spouse who tolerated his sexually deviant behavior. He is intelligent and articulate. Likely began as a voyeur in his late teens or early 20s. Lived and or worked near Ventura, California in 1980. Neat and well organized in his personal life. Peep into windows of many potential victims who were not attacked, possibly unmarried and did not enter into long-term relationships. Self-assured and confidence in his abilities. Sexually functional and capable of ejaculation when with consenting and non-consenting partners. Was a skilled and experienced cat burglar and may have began that way. Was in good physical condition. Would appear harmless. Would continue committing violent crimes until incapacitated by prison, death, or some other intervention. Would have been described by those who knew him as arrogant, domineering, and manipulative, and a chronic liar. As being an investigator for 42 years, I have a burning feeling that this suspect is already in the case files which are buried. I even have a feeling that the suspect has already been questioned by police. I have a gut feeling that this serial killer has killed again, and he knew that his whole MO would have to change to keep him from getting caught. New Bedford, Massachusetts highway killer. New Bedford highway killer is an unidentified serial killer responsible for the deaths of 9 women and the disappearance of 2 additional women in New Bedford, Massachusetts between July 1988 to June of 1989. All of the killer's victims were known prostitutes and substance abusers. Victims: Robin Rhodes, 28, last seen in Bedford, April of 1988. Rochelle Clifford Doprella, 28, last seen in New Bedford, late April 1988. Deborah McConnell, 25, last seen in New Bedford, May 1988. Deborah Denoris, 30, last seen in New Bedford, May 1988. Christine Monotero, 19, was last seen in Bedford, late May 1988. Marilyn Roberts, 34, was last seen in Bedford, June of 1988. Nancy Pava, 36, was last seen in New Bedford, July 7, 1988. Deborah DeMello, 35, was last seen in New Bedford, July 11, 1988. Mary Rose Santos, 26, last seen in New Bedford, July 16, 1988. Sandra Bothello, 24, was last seen in New Bedford, August 11, 1988. Don Mendez, 25, was last seen in New Bedford on September 4, 1988. Suspects: Anthony DeGarza. In May of 1989, Anthony DeGarza was identified by a locally known New Bedford prostitute by means of a picture provided by a young, inexperienced detective, Lorraine Forrest. The prostitute, who described the assailant as having a flat nose, never named DeGarza as a positive suspect, but stated he looked like the man who assaulted her. Anthony DeGarza was later accused of 17 rapes and assaults on several prostitutes. Based on allegations, DeGarza was questioned, arrested, and charged with 17 rapes and assaults, while also being investigated as a suspect in 9 murders along the area highways. After 15 months of incarceration and 18 court appearances, DeGarza was released on bail in January of 1990. He was then briefly rearrested for allegedly uttering threats to DA Ronald Pena for wrongful prosecution and imprisonment. DeGarza again posted bond, but was then later found dead at his girlfriend's house under a picnic table. His death was ruled a suicide. Authorities investigated his possible connection to the New Bedford prostitute murders. Kenneth C. Ponte. In August 1990, a grand jury indicted New Bedford attorney Kenneth Ponte, 40, in the murder of Rochelle Clifford DePorla, who had been beaten to death. Ponte had a checkered past, including drug use and private involvement in DePorla's affairs. Bristol County District Attorney Ronald Pena suggested that Ponte had murdered DePorla because she allegedly was planning to expose his drug activities. Dorparella's mother stated that her daughter had once given her a telephone number to Ponte in the event she needed to be reached. Ponte admitted to having represented Deportella in April of 1988, shortly before she disappeared, when she accused another man of raping her. Ponte, who moved to Florida in September 1988, entered a plea of absolutely not guilty and posted a $50,000 bond. In March 1991, the district attorney dropped murder charges against Ponte, citing lack of evidence. The following year, remaining drug and assault charges were dropped, and the New Bedford case went cold. Ponte resurfaced in the news in May of 2009 in two separate incidents. Police dug up the driveway and patio of Ponte's former New Bedford home with a backhoe, but were unable to find evidence linking Ponte to any crime. On the morning of May 15th, Ponte was arrested for shoplifting and was found with 4 cans of sardines, a block of cheese stolen from a Price Right store in New Bedford. On January 27, 2010, Ponte was found dead in his New Bedford home. The Bristol County District Attorney Office has discounted foul play as a cause of death. Daniel Tavers, Jr., while in prison for murder of his mother, Daniel Thomas Travers, Jr., sent threatening letters to one prison staff, indirectly claiming responsibility for the highway killings. He lived in New Bedford and had knowledge of where another murdered woman, Gail, had been buried within a mile from his home. He had been convicted of 2 recent killings, Brian and Beth Muack. He was convicted in 2015 of the murder of Gail Bethallo, who went missing in 1988. The Alphabet murders. Location: Rochester, New York. Number of victims: 3 confirmed dead. The Alphabet murders, was also known as the double initial murders, took place in the early 1970s in Rochester, New York area. 3 young girls were raped and strangled. The case got its name, the Alphabet murders, from the fact that each of the girls' first and last names started with the same letter, and that each body was found in a town that had the name stating with the same letter as each girl's name. Cameron Colon in Churchville, Wanda Wakowitz in Webster, and Michelle Menendez in Macedown. While lots of people was questioned, the killer was never caught. One man, considered to be a person of interest in the case, he committed suicide several weeks after the last of the murders, but was cleared in 2007 by DNA testing. The case of Cameron Colon, her uncle, was also considered a prime suspect until his suicide in 1991. Another suspect was Kenneth Bianchi, who at the time was an ice cream vendor in Rochester, vending from sites close to the first 2 murder scenes. He was a Rochester native who later moved to Los Angeles with his cousin Angelo Bruno Jr., who committed the Hillstride Strangler murders between 1977 and 1978. Bianchi was never charged with the Alphabet murders, and he was repeatedly tried to have investigators officially clear him from suspicion. However, there is circumstantial evidence that his car was seen at 2 of the murder scenes. He remains under suspicion. However, on an investigation Discovery television series, Dark Minds, episode named Double Initial Murder was first aired on February 22, 2012, and was hosted by M. William Phelps. It was reported that Bianchi's DNA profile was tested in 1985 and it did not match the biological evidence left at the crime scene of Wanda Wakowitz. Rochester's victim, Carmen Colin, disappeared November 16, 1971. She was found 2 days later, 12 miles from where she was last seen. Although found in the town of Riga, the village of Churchville is the town's center of population, and the center of Chile is nearby. Wanda Wakowitz, 11, disappeared in 1973. She was found the next day at a rest area off of State Route 104 in Webster, 7 miles from Rochester, New York. Michelle Menendez, 11, disappeared on November 26, 1973. She was found 2 days later in Mesa, 15 miles from Rochester, New York. In the early 1970s, in the blue-collar city of Rochester, New York, 3 girls ages 10 to 11 was raped and strangled. The attacks seemed to be linked by the alphabet. Each of the girls' first and last names started with the same letter, and their bodies were found in nearby towns that began with these letters. Hundreds of suspects were questioned, yet a killer was never charged. In 2011, a Rochester man named Joseph Nasso was found guilty of a similar set of alphabet murders that occurred in California in the late 1970s. Despite the eerie parallels, police have never been able to link Nasso to the lettered murders in his hometown of Rochester. The alphabet murders, also known as the double initial murders, took place from 1971 to 1973 in Rochester, New York area. 3 young girls were raped and strangled. Carmen Colin goes missing. Carmen Colin lived with her grandparents when she disappeared on November 16, 1971. She was last seen leaving a drugstore on West Main Street near her Brown Street home. She had been sent on an errand to pick up a prescription. She was found 2 days later, 12 miles from where she was last seen, by 2 teenage boys who were bicycling along Steams Road in Regina. Although found in a gully laying against a rock in the town of Regina, the village of Churchville is the town's center of population, and the town of Chile is nearby. She had been beaten, raped, and strangled, with fingernail marks scarring her neck and much of her body. Even more troubling reports came in later from drivers who said they had spotted a semi-nude girl running along Interstate 490 westbound about a mile east of Regina. Drivers reported that they had seen Carmen running with a blue car backing up on his shoulder following her. Wanda Wakowitz vanishes. 17 months later, Wanda, 11, disappeared on April 2, 1973. A red-haired tomboy, she was found the next day at a rest area in Webster off of State Road 104, 7 miles from Rochester, New York. Wanda has been sent to the Conquet Avenue supermarket for groceries when she purchased $8.52 worth of groceries. She left the store and vanished. Her body was found by a state trooper. She had been raped and strangled, and probably with a belt. DNA evidence was left on her body. Witnesses claim to have seen a red-haired girl pulled into a brown car around Conquet Avenue. The brown car did not match the description of the car that had followed Carmen on Interstate 490. Michelle Menendez disappeared. Michelle, 10 years old, disappeared on November 26, 1973, from the streets in front of her home. She was found 2 days later in a rural stretch of road in Mesa, 15 miles from Rochester, New York. She was last seen at the Good Man Pizza by her uncle, who had volunteered to give her a ride home. Michelle declined. Later on that day, she went missing. A woman reported seeing a young girl resembling Michelle sitting in a car at a fast food restaurant in Penfield. A man was seen walking toward the car with a bag of food from the restaurant. Michelle's autopsy revealed she had eaten a hamburger. Also that evening, a man stopped on along Route 350 in Walworth after he saw a car stopped with an apparent flat tire. A girl resembling Michelle sat in the car. The man with the flat tire made it apparent he wanted no help. Police have positioned whether the initials of the victims carry any so-called meaning to the killings, putting the first initial of each girl's name as a possible abbreviation of the killer's words to the innocent victims, "Come with me." Suspects abound. While hundreds of people were questioned, the killer was never caught. Dennis Termini, a local fireman, considered to be a person of interest in the case, and was cleared in 2007 by DNA testing. He committed suicide months after the killings by shooting himself in the head with a pistol after police cornered him for an arrest related to a rape of a teenager. His car had matched the description used in the abductions, and police positioned his fireman's suit, which he always carried with him, could have been donned in order to gain the trust of the victims. In the case of Carmen Colon, her uncle was also considered a suspect until his suicide in 1991. Miguel Colon left the area and traveled to Puerto Rico shortly after the murder. Police found a doll in his car and suspected the vehicle had been wiped clean. Miguel later returned to New York and was questioned but never charged with the murder. In 1991, Miguel committed suicide inside the Radio Street home after police were called to the scene for a domestic dispute complaint. Miguel shot and wounded his wife and brother-in-law and called for police to kill him. He then shot himself. Another suspect was Kenneth Bianchi, a Rochester native who later moved to Los Angeles with his cousin Angelo Bruno, committed the Hillside Strangler murders between 1977 and 1978. Bianchi was never charged with the Alphabet murders, and he has repeatedly tried to have investigators officially clear him from suspicion. Police note that all three girls were from poor Catholic families and each did poorly in school, hence the proposal from the move of the Alphabet killers that the killer was a local math tutor. Police also found white cat hair on all three bodies. They also note the letters C, M, and W are the 3rd, 13th, and 23rd letters of the alphabet. The West Mesa murders refers to the remains of 11 women found buried in 2009 in the desert on the West Mesa of Albuquerque, New Mexico. No suspects have been identified in the case, and the serial killer is believed to be responsible. Between 2001 and 2005, 11 women were buried by unknown assailant in a land bank of Albuquerque, West Mesa, in an undeveloped area within the city limits. Satellite imagery taken between 2003 and 2005 showed tire marks and patches of disturbed soil in the area where the remains were discovered. By 2006, development and encroachment of the area, and soon after, the site was disturbed, buried, and platted for residential development. Due to the 2008 housing bubble collapse, development on the west side halted before housing could be built at the burial site. After neighbors complained of flooding, a detention pond was put in by the developer, built in the approximate area of the burial site, inadvertently exposing bones to the surface. On February 2nd, 2009, a woman walking a dog found a human bone on the West Mesa and reported it to police. As a result of the police investigation, authorities discovered the remains of 11 women and girls and a fetus buried in the area. They were between the ages of 15 and 32 years of age. Most were Hispanic and most were involved with drugs and sex work. Named the West Mesa Bone Collector. The West Mesa Bone Collector is believed to have killed at least 11 victims. All of them are women between the ages of 15 and 32 years of age, and most were Hispanic. The women had gone missing between 2001 and 2005, long before the bodies were uncovered. 10 of the 11 victims were known prostitutes and drug users, a fact that police pointed out early on and often. Known as to the less dead, the victims were largely considered to be invisible to law enforcement or simply unimportant enough for their deaths to be investigated until the police realized they had a serial killer on their hands. The victims, the remains discovered in 2009, were identified as those of the following women, all of whom disappeared between 2001 and 2005. According to satellite photos, the last victim was buried in 2005. Jamie Barella, 15 years of age. Monica Candarella, 22 years of age. Victoria Chavez, 26 years of age. Virginia Cloven, 24 years of age. Sabelia Edwards, 15 years of age. Cinnamon Elks, 32 years of age. Doreen Marquez, 24 years of age. Julie Nitro, 24 years of age. Victoria Romero, 28 years of age. Evelyn Salazar, 27 years of age. Michelle Valadez, 22 years of age. Edwards was a 15-year-old runaway from Lawton, Oklahoma, was the only African American and the only victim from Alice State. Michelle Valadez was 4 months pregnant at the time of her death. On December 9, 2010, Albuquerque police released 6 photos of 7 unidentified women who may also be linked to West Mesa. Some of the women appear to be unconscious, and many share the same physical characteristic as the original 11 victims. The following day, the police released an additional photograph of another woman. This woman was identified by family members who reported that she had died of natural causes several years ago. On December 13, 2010, police investigated that 2 of the women in the photos that have been identified as alive and could have valuable information that they can be located. Police would not say how or where they obtained the photos. Police suspect that the bodies were all buried by the same person or persons and may be the work of a serial killer who has since come to be referred to as the West Mesa Bone Collector, who has not been caught. The Oakland County, Michigan child killer, also known as the babysitter. You know you have succeeded as a serial killer if your criminal act caused a huge stir and hysteria among the hearts of people. The babysitter had done it in less than 13 months back in 1976 when he captured and tortured and sexually abused and finally strangled 4 children in Detroit, Michigan. He may have only had killed 4 victims, but you will see all of them were children. Charlie Chopoff is a good man compared to this guy. To keep children for 4 to 19 days just so you can strangle them and do nasty things to them is a very sinister and ruthless thing to do. The babysitter would feed them and bathe them. He was even worse than Jack the Ripper. The victims that have been confirmed: Mark Steubens, 12 years old, of Fernandale, Michigan, was last seen leaving an American Legion Hall on Sunday afternoon, February 15, 1976. He had told his mother he was going home to watch television. His body was found on February 19th, neatly laid out in a snowbank in the parking lot of an office building at the 10 Mile Road and Greenfield in Southfield. Some reports claim Oak Park. Greenfield is the boundary between the 2 cities. He had been strangled and sexually assaulted with an object and had suffered 2 lacerations to the left rear of his head. Rope marks were evident upon his wrists and ankles, indicated that he had been bound throughout his period of activity. He was fully clothed in an outfit and was wearing what he was last seen alive in. Jill Robinson, 12 years of age, of Royal Oak, packed a backpack and ran away from home on Wednesday, December 22, 1976, following an argument with her mother over dinner preparations. The day after her disappearance, her bicycle was found behind a hobby store on Main Street in that city. Her body was found on the morning of December 26 along the side of Interstate 75 near Big Beaver Road in Troy, Michigan. She was killed by a single 12-gauge shotgun blast to the face while trying to supine in the favorite position in which her body was found. She was fully clothed and still wearing the backpack. The body was placed within sight of the Troy police station, once again laid out neatly in the snow. Christine Melick, 10 years old, of Berkeley, was last seen Sunday, January 2nd, 1977, at 3 p.m. at the 7-Eleven store on 12 Mile Road on Oakshire in Berkeley, purchasing a magazine. She was reported missing by her mother 3 hours later. A mail carrier spotted her fully clothed body 19 days later on the left side of the rural road in Franklin Village. She had been smothered. The body was laid within a few of the nearby homes, eyes closed, arms folded across her chest, and once again in the snow. An autopsy revealed she had died less than 24 hours before her body was discovered. Timothy King, 11 years old, borrowed 30 cents from his older sister and left his home in Birmingham, Michigan, with skateboard in hand to buy candy at the drugstore on nearby Maple Road on Wednesday, March 16, 1977 at about 8:30 p.m. He left the store by the rear entrance, which opened to the parking lot shared with the supermarket, and vanished. An intensive search was executed that covered the entire Detroit metropolitan area, and there was widespread media coverage, already heavy with coverage on previous three slayings. In an emotional television appeal, Timothy's father, Barry King, begged the abductor to release his son unharmed. In a letter printed to the Detroit News, Marion King wrote that she hoped Timothy could come home soon so she could serve him his favorite meal, Kentucky Fried Chicken. In the late evening hours of March 22, 1977, two teenagers in a car spotted his body in a shallow ditch alongside Gill Road about 300 feet south of 8 Mile Road in Lavina, Michigan, just across the county line in Wayne County. His skateboard was placed next to his body. His clothing had been neatly pressed and washed. He had been suffocated, sexually assaulted with an object. The post-mortem showed that Timothy had eaten fried chicken before he was slain, and that he had been suffocated approximately 6 hours before his body had been found. Archibald Edward Sloan. Sloan was a pedophile who victimized young boys in the neighborhood. He became a person of interest when hair samples found in his 1966 Pontiac Bonneville matched hairs found on the bodies of Timothy King and Mark Stebbins. However, their hair samples did not match the other victims. Sloan often lent his car out to his pedophile friends. The investigation. After the discoveries of Christine Melick's body, authorities realized they were dealing with three related cases and evidence that were similar. Reports was released publicly of the possibility of a serial killer operating in the Oakland County area. The Michigan State Police led a group of law enforcement officials from 13 communities in the formation of a task force devoted solely to the investigation. Soon after Timothy King was abducted, a composite drawing of the suspected kidnapper and his vehicle was released. A woman claimed she had seen a boy with a skateboard talking to a man in a parking lot of a drugstore that Timothy had told his parents he was going in order to ride his skateboard. The vehicle was reportedly as a blue AMC Gremlin with a white side stripe. Authorities would eventually question every Gremlin owner in Oakland County. Investigators put together a profile of the killer based on witnesses' descriptions of the man seen talking to Timothy King the night he disappeared. A white male with dark complexion, 25 to 35 years old, with shaggy hair and sideburns. Authorities believed that the killer had a job that gave him freedom of movement and may have appeared to be someone that a child might trust, such as a police officer, clergyman, or a doctor. He was also believed to be familiar with the area and had the ability to keep children for long periods of time without arousing neighbors' suspicions. The task force checked out more than 18,000 tips, which resulted in about 24 arrests on unrelated charges and the busting of a multi-state child pornography ring operating on North Fox Island in Lake Michigan, northwest of the Lena Peninsula. However, task force members were unable to make much headway in the investigation. Officer Davis was one of the first on the case and tried his hardest to bring closure to the families of the victims. The task force disbanded in December 1978 and the investigation was turned over to the Michigan State Police. The killer never struck again. Chris Bush. Chris Bush had been in police custody shortly before Timothy's abduction for suspected involvement in child pornography. He committed suicide in November 1978, and bloodstained ligatures were found in his apartment, as was a hand-drawn image of a boy closely resembling Mark Steuben's screaming in agony, which was found pinned to the wall which Bush committed suicide. There has been no confirmed activity of the Oakland County child killer since his death. The Michigan State Police have since released 3,400 pages of investigative records to Barry King. James Vincent Gunnels. As a young teenager, Gunnels was repeatedly sexually assaulted by Chris Bush at their Ass Lake cabin. Bush was convicted of the crime. Gunnels' hair was partially DNA matched with hair found on the blouse of Christine Mellick. John Wayne Gacy. Authorities in Michigan were investigating that possibly that serial killer John Wayne Gacy could have been the Oakland County child killer. A witness of the 1977 abduction of Timothy King remembered seeing two men with King. The first suspect was described as a young man in his late 20s. The second suspect bore a strong resemblance to Gacy. John Wayne Gacy was also allegedly in Michigan around the time of the murders. According to DNA tests conducted in 2013, Gacy was not involved in the Oakland County killings. Theodore Longborgnine. Police in Parma Heights, Ohio, arrested Ted Lamborgnine, a retired auto worker believed to have been involved in a child porn ring in the 1970s. On March 27, 2007, investigators told Detroit television station WXYZ that Lamborgnine was considered a top suspect in the case. Lamborgnine pleaded guilty to 15 sex-related counts involving young boys rather than accept a plea bargain that would have required him to take a polygraph test on the Oakland County child killings. Lamborgnine also rejected an offer of a reduced sentence in exchange for a polygraph on the case. In October 2007, the family of Mark Steuben filed a wrongful death suit against Lamborgnine seeking $25,000. The lawsuit alleges Lamborgnine, who lived in the Metro Detroit in the late 1970s, abducted Mark and held him captive in a Royal Oak house for 4 days in February 1976 before smothering him to death during a sexual assault. Lamborgnine has never been formally linked nor charged in the death of Mark Steuben. Attorneys David L. Binkley has sought compensation, including funeral costs for the Steuben's brother, Michael, but stressed that money is secondary. Resumed investigation and new evidence. Investigation reports released to family of the victims. Police reports obtained by Ken King, including new revelations, including the DNA testing of new suspects, a sketch found at the scene of the Bush suicide of a boy resembling Mark Steuben screaming in terror wearing a hooded sweatshirt and a bloody rope also found at the scene of the Bush's suicide. Catherine Board, sister of Timothy King, compiled an archive of investigative material as the case grew. Upon researching the case records, the King family produced a documentary entitled Decades of Deceit. The documentary condemns the investigators and prosecutors for the alleged shoddy investigations and uncooperative communication, and in particular of the disregarding leads the King family discovered in 2006. Funds generated from the sale of the documentary were donated to the Tim King Fund, designated to help abused children and support child activities for Birmingham, Michigan children. DNA test of hair. According to DNA tests conducted in 2012, samples of the hair belonging to an unknown person was found on the seat of Archibald Ed Sloan's 1966 Pontiac Bonneville and bodies of victims Mark Stevens and Timothy King. The samples are one of the first pieces of concrete evidence linking the two of the murders. The samples have, however, exonerated many of the current suspects. DNA tests also confirmed that the white hair from the same dog was found on all 4 victims. The new suspect, James Vincent Gunnels, was discovered when hair found on the blouse of Christine Melnick was later tested for DNA. However, due to the condition of the hair, only an inconclusive match could be achieved. Gunnels was convicted in the past for property crimes and was living in a halfway house. He was released in 2011 as the police lacked evidence to charge him. Final thoughts. As to why these people were not caught, maybe it was not meant to be. One thing for sure, you could always be famous for one gruesome night. Just like the Ripper, these people got infamous for nights and days of extreme morality, repulsive behavior. These killers lived entire lifetimes of evil, and often their first official victims were not their first murders. These people lived years of violence, torture, killing, illusions that makes them completely unsavory, things that must be talked about from time to time. Hopefully, just by reading this, you have become better informed about serial killers. One important fallacy of serial killers: they always get caught or want to get caught. After reading this, it is easy to see that sometimes they do not want to get caught and they do not seek out incarceration. I have a quote for our listeners. A diplomat is a man who always remembers a woman's birthday, but never remembers her age. Robert Frost. Thank you to our listeners. This is the end of tonight's podcast. Always remember, folks, if you ever get bored with nothing to do, take a walk deep into the woods. You might be surprised what you might find. Thanks. My name is Mark, and good night from Plattsburgh, New York.